Thank you, and sorry again being a little bit late. But at the very end I arrived, which is kind of great. Okay, so I will talk about basically one of my PhD project, which was trying to understand how neighborhood level crime, or like living in higher crime areas, is associated with mental health problems, especially with mental health service use. And for this, I used the Scottish longitudinal study. And before I start, I would also acknowledge my colleagues and my supervisors working on the same project: Jamie Pierce, Chris Devon, Sarah Curtis, and Mark Cherry.
It's not up. Just use the.
It's up to use the arrows.
You'll need to use the arrows.
Yeah.
It's
On
not.
the keyboard, so.
I'm not here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so when we are talking about mental health problems, we should always acknowledge that there are huge individual and societal burden associated with mental health problems. We know that approximately 4% of the GDP in the United Kingdom is associated directly or indirectly with mental health problems. In terms of the prevalence, we know that approximately 30% of the people during their life will experience at least once a mental health problem. If you are looking more into specific disorder, then the lifetime prevalence of major depression is approximately around 15%, while, for example, the lifetime prevalence of psychosis, which is a very heavy debilitating disorder, is a little bit less than 1%. In terms of the etiology of mental disorders, there are quite a few important individual risk factors, such as biogenetic factors, also psychological factors and social factors. Also, in the recent year, there is more research suggesting that the contextual determinants of mental health might be of importance. And yes, so this project was, as I mentioned earlier, about neighborhood level crime. And recent systematic reviews suggest that neighborhood level crime might be a potential key contextual predictor of mental health. So a systematic review and meta-analysis kind of collected all the evidence available in this field, and it found a significant association between neighborhood level crime and mental health problems. So how can neighborhood level crime impact mental health? So I think that might be direct and indirect pathways. In the direct pathways, we should distinguish between becoming a victim of crime, for example, if one lives in a high-income area, or witnessing, for example, violence and crime in one's residential neighborhood. Also, the indirect effects of neighborhood crime should be acknowledged, such as, for example, if one lives in a higher crime area, the person might be more afraid of becoming victimized or experiencing any crime. Also, in higher crime areas, we know that there are more often unhealthy behaviors, especially associated with coping, such as alcohol use or tobacco smoking. Also, in higher crime areas, people are usually less engaged in health-promoting social and physical activities. Still, in the research, we saw that there are several important lacks in the evidence. First of all, the majority of the studies are cross-sectional, and especially, even if they are longitudinal, they are usually focusing on longitudinally measured outcomes, but not longitudinally measured exposures. So usually the literature has single crime measurement. Also, crime is very often measured on a large geographic scale, such as like local authorities. However, we know from the literature of criminology that actually crime events are concentrated across very small geographic units, for example, in street segments, thereby measuring crime on a larger geographic scale might not really measure the impact of crime. So the aim of this study was, again, to explore the longitudinal association between local crime, change in crime levels, and mental health service use in Scotland. The study sample for the study, we used the Scottish longitudinal study, which is an anonymized large-scale longitudinal data set coming together from statistical and administrative data sources. And it is basically based on the 91, 2001, and 2011 censuses. This is a nationally representative sample of the Scottish population, and it captures approximately 5% of the population. The SLS is also a very rich source of individual level covariates, such as age, gender, education, social grade, employment, and so on. So in this study, we included individuals if they were present in the 2001 and 2011 censuses, and if they were at least 16 years old in 2001. On the other hand, we excluded individuals if they were living in communal establishments, such as in nursing homes. And we also excluded them if they had conflicting age and gender information coming from these two censuses. So the exposure neighborhood level crime was coming from the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, which has one of its domain as a crime domain, which captures geocoded crime events in Scotland, such as assault, crimes of violence, drug offenses, housebreaking, vandalism, and so on. So these crime events, they are aggregated on Scottish data zone level, which are capturing approximately 1,000 individuals. And across entire Scotland, there are 6,500 data zones. And we used crime data coming from the 2006, 2009, and 2011 Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. The outcome of this study was psychotropic medication coming from the Scottish National Prescription Information System, which basically captures any prescribed medications which were dispensed and reimbursed in community settings, so basically by GPs across entire Scotland. Here we focused on two main groups of psychotropic medications, on antidepressants and on antipsychotics. So the first study wanted to just understand association, longitudinal association between crime exposure and newly prescribed psychotropic medications. Showing here the study design. Again, basically, individuals were captured in 2001 and 2011 censuses. The cover rates were coming from the 2011 census. And then, based on the 2011 census address, we linked crime information to each of the individual participants. And we also linked psychotropic medications to the individuals using the key number in Scotland, which captures individual level information on health services. So what we did first, in order to have newly prescribed medication, we excluded individuals if they had any psychotropic medication in the first 6 months of the study. And after that, we followed them up for 5.5 years for any new medication. And we tried to see whether there's an association between crime and new prescribed medications. This table shows the results for prescribed antidepressants. So basically what we have found is living in higher crime areas was associated with newly prescribed antidepressants medication, even after we adjusted for individual level and area level confounders, such as, for example, urban density and neighborhood level deprivation. Certainly, when we adjusted for neighborhood level deprivation between model 2 and model 3, we saw that actually the impact of neighborhood level crime dropped. But this is actually what we would also expect, because one of the pathways how neighborhood level deprivation impacts mental health is potentially through higher crime in that area. So this is what we would actually also expect. And then I'm showing the same for psychotropic, for antipsychotics. Here, actually, it's very interesting that the neighborhood deprivation wasn't associated with antipsychotics at all. So there was, however, a strong association between neighborhood level crime and newly prescribed antipsychotics, especially in the male subsample. And again, neighborhood level deprivation and also urban density was not associated with newly prescribed antipsychotics. So after that, we tried to understand whether there are different associations across the life course, so in different age groups. And so this first figure is for the male subsample. So basically what we saw is that living in higher crime areas, especially in young and middle adulthood, was associated with higher risk of having prescribed antidepressants in the male subsample, and also with higher risk of having prescribed antipsychotics, again in the male subsample. We did the exact same for the female subsample. So unsurprisingly, again, in young and middle adulthood, living in higher crime areas was associated in the female subsample with higher risk of antipsychotic prescription. Antidepressant prescription, but not with antipsychotics, which is an interesting difference between males and females. Again, so this was the first study. And after this, we wanted to go a little bit more into detail and try to understand whether these are potential causal associations, even if we know that from observational data, we cannot really make any causal inferences. And for this, actually, we use the fact that crime rates are changing and have been changing in the last 20 years. For example, in the case of Scotland, since the 90s, crime rates are dropping. So what we did, again, with the same sample, we include individuals who were present in the 2001 and 2011 census. Cover rates were coming from both censuses. And then we used crime measured in 3 time points, in the 2006, 2009, and 2011 Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. And we linked these crime rates to the individuals in the Scottish longitudinal study by using addresses which were recorded by the GPs, so which is also available. So basically what we did, so during the follow-up period, which was 9 years, we divided into 3-year intervals, and each of these 3-year intervals, we basically extracted the address where people live for the longest time and linked this address with crime rates. So in this case, we have right now 3 different crime rates for each of the individuals. Outcomes, again, are coming from the Scottish prescription data set, which were measured in the last wave, so between 2010 and 2012. So, because in the previous study, we have already seen that average crime rates are associated with mental health problems. Here we were actually more interested whether changes between individuals might be also associated with mental health problems. Therefore, we tried to decompose the impact of average neighborhood crime exposure and change in crime exposure during the follow-up period. And we decomposed it by calculating, again, average crime and then the deviation from the average crime in 2006 and 2012. Just showing some information about how crime changed. As you also see, basically crime was dropping across Scotland during the observation period, and it dropped approximately by 6 crimes per 1,000 individuals in between each of the waves. However, this kind of was not uniform across entire Scotland. You see actually Glasgow, and I know it's really small, but you can see that there are some data zones when crime was actually increasing. So while there is an average drop, there are areas where crime is still increasing. And we use this heterogeneity actually in our analysis. So here actually we run the analysis by stratifying the sample into those they were staying in the same area during the 6 years and those they were moving around. Just because we don't have enough time, I would just actually focus on the change in crime exposure variable, which basically showed for us that if a young adult was staying during the entire observation period in an area and the crime was going up in that area, then actually this was associated with higher risk of having prescribed antidepressant medication, which is again more of a potential causal association, but again, with all the limitations of observational data. For antipsychotic medications, we didn't find any significant association between changing crime levels and new prescriptions. And then among the people they moved recently, we find actually that if middle-aged adults, they were moving to higher crime areas, then they had potentially higher risk of having prescribed antipsychotics. We have to be very careful with this association, so that's why we run additional sensitivity analysis, which actually suggested that if we take into consideration all mental health service use for these middle-aged individuals in the last 10 years, then in this case, this association wasn't there anymore. So that's why we could potentially assume that here the association might be in another direction, that it might be more like health selective migration. So individuals with long-standing, very severe mental health problems who are taking antipsychotic medications, they are potentially moving to areas with higher crime because these areas are cheaper, it's potentially easier to find accommodation there. So let's put together all these findings from these 2 different studies. First of all, we saw that neighborhood level crime is associated with antidepressants and antipsychotic medication. Second, we also find that neighborhood level area disadvantage is also associated with antidepressants medication. And one of the pathways is actually for antidepressants medication is running from area deprivation through crime and then mental health outcomes. For antipsychotics, however, we only find that neighborhood level crime was a key determinant, area level determinant for antipsychotic prescriptions. So in terms of vulnerable social and so in terms of vulnerable age and gender groups, we find young and middle-aged adults, especially vulnerable for antidepressants, and middle-aged males as especially vulnerable for antipsychotic prescriptions. And last but not least, if we want to kind of understand kind of like causal association behind this relationship for antidepressants, it might be potentially more of a causational hypothesis suggesting an association from crime exposure to mental health problems. However, for antipsychotics, we cannot be so sure about this, and it might be also potentially plausible health selective migration association. Also, I would suggest that actually these different kind of hypotheses are also confirmed in the literature. So especially for psychosis in the second part of life, we assume that there is actual health selective migration moving into like a more deprived areas and areas with higher crime because of financial difficulties. So certainly because we were using service use data, there are certain limitations which have to be acknowledged. For example, medications, so psychotropic medications are not, so they are a proxy of mental disorders, but they are not really described for 100% mental disorders. For example, antipsychotics can be also prescribed for very severe non-responding depression. Also, especially in older age, both of these medications can be prescribed for people that have Alzheimer's. So it's very often the case these are prescribed. Also, we know that in Scotland, crime rates are underreported, and it's especially the case in areas which are very deprived. Finally, although we were very lucky to have adjust data across the entire follow-up period, adjust data coming from GP records are not very, on average they are reliable, but not reliable for particular groups. For example, young adults, if they are moving, they are not always registering immediately with the GP after they move. So therefore, we have to be careful, especially in younger age groups. In terms of policy implications, so we saw that there's an association between neighborhood level crime and mental health. So potentially violence prevention programs or neighborhood renewal programs might have a population mental health impact. Also allocating services in higher crime areas and providing prevention in higher crime areas or like indicative prevention for high-risk individual might have to reduce the population burden in these areas. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the Longitudinal Studies Centre in Scotland and the funder of this study, the European Commission. Thank you.